Now, on the ground in Ukraine, the Russian army says it has captured 2 more villages in the east, in the Donetsk region. Russian forces have advanced in the east at their fastest rate in 2 years. That was last month. The Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov describing the dynamic on the front line there as positive. Well, those reported gains come despite a Ukrainian incursion onto Russian soil designed to divert Russian troops. The attack on the Kursk region began in August. It is the first assault on Russian territory by a foreign army since the Second World War. And our senior reporter, Norris Trent, was one of a small number of journalists who was recently able to travel to the Ukrainian-controlled parts of Kursk, embedded with the Ukrainian army. Catherine is with me now. We'll talk to her in a few minutes. But first, here's her report from Kursk.
In an armoured vehicle speeding down a bomb-cratered road, we're heading into territory proudly seized by Ukraine.
We're being taken by the Ukrainian army into Russian territory, into the Kursk region, part of which they've been occupying since the beginning of August, when Ukraine mounted a lightning offensive and breached the Russian border in a move which surprised many of Ukraine's allies.
We pass Russian road signs and see plumes of smoke on the horizon. We're taken to 2 villages in Kursk we're not allowed to name for security reasons. Ukrainian officers tell us some 2,000 Russian civilians remain in the areas they control. Some locals come to collect food parcels, but are largely suspicious or hostile to the Ukrainian troops.
Putin is Putin. He's a great guy. What can I say about him? He knows what he's doing.
Why don't you just take us all out and shoot us? You think everything's our fault.
Alexei is the Ukrainian commander charged with overseeing the Russian population here. He tries to convince them of the realities of Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
Россия показывала освобожденный якобы населенный пункт, там вообще ни одного двора не осталось. В Бахмуте, в других городах Украины, там, где побывали россияне. То же самое было в Киевской области. Ирпень, Буча.
В руках Украины?
Нет, это неправда.
Неправда?
Нет, это неправда.
Ну, давайте дальше.
For 20 years, they've been suffering from Russian propaganda, from the large quantity of lies that were poured into their ears and minds.
President Zelensky says that Ukraine has taken more than 1,300 square kilometers inside Kursk. Russia disputes those figures, but Ukraine has taken over scores of settlements. The situation on the ground remains unstable. We're hearing quite a lot of artillery fire and battle sounds from not too far off.
Alexei takes us to see some of the damage from the ongoing fighting.
This house was bombed last week. When I arrived, it was still smoking. In the settlements where the Ukrainian military is stationed, the shelling is constant. We didn't even go to the larger town today because there are so many drones attacking there.
It's unclear how long Ukraine can hold this territory. Russian troops are massing for a counter-offensive to take back all of Kursk, which is already underway. Ukraine hopes this will draw them away from other fragile front lines.
And Norris Trent is with me now. Catherine, take us a little bit behind the scenes of your reporting then. How did you find access and filming during your embed with the Ukrainian army?
Hello there, Nadia. We were taken in, as you saw, by the Ukrainian army as part of a small group of journalists. Impossible to access by oneself, of course, and impossible for us to access via the Russian side, where we haven't been given visas for quite some time. But the access, we were allowed to film whatever we wanted apart from military vehicles. The Ukrainian army was very anxious not to give away any of its locations because, of course, they are being targeted daily by Russian attacks in this counter-offensive. Vladimir Putin has said that he wants to take back the whole of the Kursk region, is being reported by October. So it's a pretty intensive fight. You could hear some of the artillery there. There was even more off camera. So we were allowed to speak to whichever civilians we wanted to, including ones that you saw in our report who definitely hadn't yet been convinced by Ukraine's argument, and we were not given restrictions on what we were allowed to broadcast from them. So in terms of the restrictions, they were mainly only on the security side. Off camera, soldiers telling us, look, the battle is intense, it's dynamic. That was the word one of them used, so fast moving. The situation's changing hand. We had been due to go to another location, but at the last minute we couldn't go there because there were just too many attacks. And one soldier told us that in the 24 hours preceding our visit, there'd been 80 attack drones or missiles, including guide bombs, fired by Russia onto what is part of its own territory inside the Kursk region.
And Catherine, I know that there were parts of this story that you weren't able to show us in the film itself. Tell us a bit about what we actually didn't see.
I mean, there were so many things we got in our very quick visit there, but the civilians who are left behind are often people who are sick or elderly, and often they've been cut off from their families elsewhere in the Kursk region in what is still controlled by the Russian government. So they're desperate to evacuate, and they're asking to evacuate. The Ukrainian soldiers at this point are saying, well, you know, Russia's not allowing us to, and they've called for the UN and the Red Cross to have access to Kursk to assess the humanitarian needs. But they want access to telephones, which they say they don't have. They want to be able to speak to family members. Ukraine says it's giving them food, some humanitarian aid and water trucks now. So they're getting the basics of life, but life for them is very difficult day to day. Of course, we couldn't spend much time there with them experiencing as much as that because our trip reporting there lasted for a few hours for security reasons.
And as you said a bit earlier, civilians were relatively free to talk to you. The Ukrainian army were happy for you to do that. But were people in general willing to talk to you? Were they interested in speaking to foreign media?
A few people weren't, but surprisingly, we found that most people wanted to engage with us. Some of them perhaps hadn't had much contact with the outside world. Some of them thought that by speaking out, maybe they could get help to evacuate as well. Some of them wanted to express their anger, and you saw that pouring out on the streets now. And you saw the very different vision they have of the world. Some Russians we spoke to there in the Ukrainian-controlled part of Kursk for now, they said that they thought the war had started on the 6th of August. That's when Ukraine's lightning incursion into Kursk began. They didn't believe that it had started, some of them, on the 24th of February 2022. They believed what has been said on Russian state media and pumped out in the Kremlin's messaging machine that Ukraine had invaded Russia. Some of them asking us if President Zelensky was a Nazi. So, you know, a lot of these talking points that have been Kremlin talking points have clearly got through right down to this point near the Ukrainian border.
And just a final thought from you then, Catherine. Zelensky's in the United States right now, the Ukrainian president. He's due to speak to Joe Biden a bit later on this week about his sort of so-called victory plan to end the war. How does Kursk tie into that?
This is very much part of Ukraine's victory plan, as President Zelensky has named it. We've spoken to officials, including one of his closest advisors, who said, look, this is one of the ways of putting military pressure on Russia to force it to end the war, because they've tried sitting down at the negotiating table before and that didn't come to anything. So they hope to coerce Russia by military means, expressly including the incursion into Kursk, saying that by taking the war to Russian territory, they can give Russia perhaps a taste of what they've been experiencing and put Putin in a difficult position in which he might be forced to make concessions. They also hope that it will move troops away from other front lines, which are vulnerable at the moment, especially in the east, in the Donbas. They want to try and prevent advances there. And it's also already proved useful, one of them told us, in terms of prisoner exchanges. The Ukrainians, when they made this incursion, captured quite a large number of Russian prisoners, and some of them have already been exchanged for Ukrainian prisoners of war, including some defenders of Azovstal down for that last stand in Mariupol, if you remember that. So there are several tactical advantages to Ukraine of this incursion. Of course, it's coming at a heavy cost. I was at a military funeral the other day of a man who was killed in this offensive, and so that is proving to be a difficult battle, and we don't know exactly what the casualty figures or death toll figures or the positions are, because that is a tightly guarded secret. But of course there will be a cost to it for Ukraine as well.
Catherine Norris Trent speaking to us there about her reporting from the Kursk region of Russia. Thank you very much.